There's one man that you can thank for being a stalwart gatekeeper of the Back to the Future franchise so that it hasn't befallen the fate of many of your other 80s, 90s, 2000s, and even 2010 entertainment institutions, and that is Robert Zemeckis. He has been steadfast in his opinion that no, there's not going to be a remake as long as I'm alive drawing breath. No, there is not going to be some terrible sequel where Marty McFly's daughter inherits the DeLorean and makes it more eco-friendly so that she can go back in time and stop racism. No, there's not going to be any of that crap as long as I have a say. So thank God, and hopefully Robert Zemeckis lives forever. That being said, I also don't want him to do the whole Ridley Scott thing and then just go back and pervert any of the franchises that he's trying to gatekeep. Or as funny as Ridley going back and forth with the media, especially, with the Napoleon, people were critical about, I don't really think that he shot cannons at the pyramids. It doesn't really seem all that accurate. And who cares? The French don't even care about their own history. As based as that is, it's like you made Napoleon, bro. Not really looking forward to Gladiator 2, of course, but when Robert Zemeckis is out here talking about Back to the Future and a couple of the other projects that made him legendary in Hollywood, you gotta listen, you gotta perk an ear, and he says that Universal is constantly asking him for Back to the Future 4, and yeah, at this point in time, like Christopher Lloyd, I was gonna say Lee, but I did some Lord of the Rings stuff recently, so that one's also on the tip of my tongue, but Christopher Lloyd, he's basically Ash at this point in time. Getting him back into the role as Doc Brown, because as essential as Marty McFly is, it's like you can't make it Back to the Future without Doc Brown, and I don't really see anybody else also slipping into those shoes. Same way with Michael J. Fox is like he's in no shape physically, mentally, or by any means to come back to this, even if he was to just hand off the mantle of Marty McFly, pass the puffer vest on to somebody else, not really going to happen. So no, the idea of Back to the Future 4, it's gonna have to stay there on the shelf. It's probably gonna end up getting treated like Tolkien's legacy was. They waited until Christopher was no longer drawing breath, but the son of Tolkien wasn't even lowered into the ground before they announced that, yep, now it's time to pilfer the second age. They're gonna do this with Back to the Future 4 the moment that Robert Zemeckis checks out, and it's gonna suck. But what he wants to do wouldn't really end up affecting the trilogy, right? Okay, Zemeckis has no desire to continue the story, but he'd direct an adaptation of the Broadway musical, where it's like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to stand here and say that everything that Robert Zemeckis touched turned to gold, okay? He's got some duds on his resume, just like everybody else in Hollywood, but in general, it's like, it wasn't that long ago that I watched Back to the Future, and bro, those movies still hold up fantastically. I don't know about the Broadway musical. That could be a completely different kettle of fish. And yeah, I think a lot of people would end up treating that. It's kind of the same way that Sopranos fans treat the Many Saints of Newark. Remember that there was a prequel movie for The Sopranos that came out a couple of years ago? Yeah, that's wild. Today's contender, and that was written and directed by David Chase. Anyways, today's contender for least surprising news is that Universal is still begging Robert Zemeckis for another Back to the Future, despite the fact that he's on record and it says it won't happen until he and co-writer Bob Gale are dead. But in Hollywood thirsty, yes, for established IPs, and Back to the Future, legitimately, like, run through your head which IP, which franchise hasn't been pilfered and destroyed by Hollywood. You'll come up with a very, 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 very short list. I could make the argument that Harry Potter hasn't been negatively affected, even with those abysmal Fantastic Beasts movies. Like, in general, those movies in that franchise has stayed relatively unmolested. We'll have to see with that Max series and, the changes that end up getting made and approved by J.K. I Hate Men Rowling. But realistically, it's like, what, Gremlins and Back to the Future. Those are about the only ones that immediately come front to mind because, until this year, I could have said the exact same thing for Lord of the Rings and, the Hobbit movies. They're kind of goofy, quirky, and, they're bad movies, but still, they were done in earnest. They weren't done maliciously to go ahead and update and modernize Tolkien. They just did a bad job. They just had studio mandates. They wanted to make 2 films. 3 were forced on them. They weren't given enough time to plan, and they just did a bad job. And it's sad because all the people were alive that needed to be there. They were young enough to play the roles. It's just they had a bad script. Anyways, on a recent episode of Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, the Here director, that was a Tom Hanks movie that just came out that bombed spectacularly. So see, even Robert Zemeckis can do something pretty bad. The director joked that he gets a call for about Back to the Future 4 every 6 months. Though Zemeckis admitted it's a bit of an exaggeration, he has fielded many of these calls. Isn't there anything we can figure out to do here? Isn't there anything we can do? He intimated the studio's needling requests. It sounds like Gale and Zemeckis have patiently tolerated these pitches and then offered placating responses, but the real truth is that to remake the movie or to suggest that there's a Back to the Future 4, it just isn't in the cards, the filmmaker has said. And yeah, he's like, I like the Broadway musical that's out there, that's pretty fun. I might do that. We've always felt that this was enough and that she just had Alive, with it being the 3 movies, and Back to the Future the musical is more of a companion to the movies than a remake of the movie, so it's sort of like a whole another thing. And yeah, exactly. That's a way that you can look at the Hobbit movie so it doesn't tarnish the OT, even though there's nothing that's gonna tarnish the trilogy. It's like, that shit's perfect. Anyways, if he wants to do that, that's fantastic. Or here's another thing, because in that exact same interview, he was also asked about other things that he could potentially have in the pipeline, and it was quite elucidating in so much as he has an idea for a sequel for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the legendary film, right? But the rights are tied up with Disney, and according to Zemeckis, Disney would never allow Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit sequel, says the director. They can't. That's what's potentially holding it up. Arguably, the most famous female cosplay that's out there, like, where have you not gone to a convention, a Halloween party, or anything like that, and there hasn't been some hoe dressed up in a red full-length ball gown with a red wig and putting on a raspy voice? Who has not seen that? Bro, it's everywhere. It's one of the most iconic female characters of all time. And because she is one of the most iconic, traditionally feminine female characters of all time, Disney wouldn't touch it with a 25-foot pole. Who Framed Roger Rabbit sequel without Jessica Rabbit? Yeah, what is it? Nothing. It just doesn't exist. The film's director, Robert Zemeckis, shared his thoughts on a possible follow-up of the 1988 classic that featured the sexy and flirty animated wife of Roger Rabbit, donned in her iconic red dress that highlighted her hourglass figure. And yeah, that was the baddest bitch in 2D back in '88, and still to this day, I don't think that there's too many competitors for that crown. Well, on the October 30th episode of Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, Zemeckis72 shared that the current Disney would never make Roger Rabbit 2 with a Jessica Rabbit in it, adding that the times have changed. For the better or for the worse, I'll let you decide. There's a good script sitting at Disney, Zemeckis said, while disclosing that the movie's original screenwriters, Jeffrey Price and Peter S. Seaman, already wrote a follow-up film. Well, that's interesting. Current Disney would never make the Roger Rabbit today. Yeah, they can't make a movie with Jessica Rabbit in it. Zemeckis claimed Disney would never go there again, pointing out that the company has covered up her body in the Disneyland ride Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin ride in 2021. Yeah, exactly, where she's doing some kind of Dick Tracy cosplay. Well, we know exactly why she's put, one of the most iconic looks in all of film. I don't think I'm over exaggerating this, because spoiler alert, I've never seen Roger Rabbit. I've seen it referenced. I know the beats, but it came out 2 years before I was born, and I never got around to it. I've never seen it on TV or anything like that. It's just one of those iconic films that are in the zeitgeist that Robert Zemeckis, John Hughes, John Carpenter, a lot of those legendary 80s directors and producers created that everybody knows. So yeah, just by sheer cultural osmosis, you know all the references, and it seems like you've seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit, even though you haven't. So knowing what you know about Jessica Rabbit from back in the cut, as opposed to what's happening today, yeah, you come to the same conclusion that Zemeckis does. Look at what they did to Jessica at the theme park, he said on the podcast. They trussed her up in a trench coat. Yeah, exactly. And that was deliberate, right? Like, that's, oh no, she's supposed to be taken on, she's kind of inheriting the role from Bob Hoskins' character, and she's going to be more of a detective, and that precluded her from wearing a dress. That precluded her from wearing anything that could be perceived as being feminine. Bruh, come on. Because yeah, there you go. That's the poster that is put up in order to justify the costume change. But bro, you know what you're doing. You did it on purpose. I mean, you robbed her of just about all femininity that you possibly could when it comes to dress. Obviously, her face mostly carries through on that. But you robbed her of everything else. You slapped her in a burqa, and now Habibi's going to be one of the best detectives ever. Sure. Disney also gave her a new storyline for the ride, making her a private investigator wearing a trench coat to cover her iconic red outfit. Wait. Did they get rid of my girl, or is she just getting cleaned up and coming back? One person commented on the post highlighting this update. Okay, who the heck complained about this? The same freaks that would say, oh, look at how they're censoring video games. Oh, you guys are just coomers. But then in the same breath, they'll also applaud the likes of BioWare to bring on sex noise specialists. Fucking freaks, man. No, it's people who don't care about this stuff, who see this and think that that's promoting unrealistic body types. It's like, yeah, it's a cartoon, brainlet. And then also at the same time, what they think is realistic women. Oh, you've never seen a woman before? Yeah, because they're what, 180-pound land whales with a 32B titty? Like a flatzo, a legitimate flatzo, and you think that that's what real women look like? And hey, they have the audacity to say that I'm a misogynist. Like, bro, you hate women more than I could ever dream or want to dream of. Walt Disney never made any of his movies for children. Yeah, they made them. Oh, yeah, he always made them for adults, Zemeckis explained, adding that he was terrified the first time they played the film for kids. However, the concerns quickly diminished as he noted that the children were riveted by Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Yeah, because also the animation at the time, like, that was groundbreaking. The techniques that they employed to do that in order to have the 2D and the 3D characters interact with one another. And, oh yeah, right, yeah, Christopher Lloyd's the bad guy at the end of it. Did I forget his name? But it just is what it is, right? That's also very telling right there, just the quote that Zemeckis drops. Walt Disney never made any of his movies for children. He always made them for adults. I think the thing that Walt Disney never did was he never talked down to the children in his movies. He treated the kids like they were adults. And that's the thing, man. Like, you can also cast your mind back to, you know, the 80s, the 90s, and then, of course, earlier than that. And how many iconic films are out there? Okay, and I've also made this point recently as well. There's just ones that stand the test of time, and ones especially, you take a look at the release schedule of some of those years, and how even in certain cases, certain months, and what was it? Because recently EFAP broke down The Thing. And on the same day that The Thing came out, a little film called Blade Runner also came out. Like, bro, you don't get that. Oh yeah, what's the 2023 equivalent? Oh, Oppenheimer and Barbie came out the exact same day. You've got to be kidding me. There's nothing actually iconic coming out. There's a lot of slop. There's a lot of things that make a lot of money, and maybe every year or two you might get something that hits the zeitgeist. Like, I'm sure that there's good films that are out there, you know, lower budget stuff that's actually, you know, passionately worked on with a competent screenwriter and a bunch of good performances. But blockbuster titles that stand the test of time, we don't have those. You have to go back 10, 20 years in order to get a handful of good films coming out in a singular year. The early 2000s, the late 90s, early 2000s, is about when cinema peaked. After that, then yeah, you started to focus in and try to hone in on specific groups. You started to talk to only those groups and excluded everybody else. And then in the case when you get those movies that actually do hit, like your Iron Mans, and then you try to make your Marvel Cinematic Universe over the top of it, you end up trying to speak to too many people, thereby not speaking to anybody. You miss the point. You miss the point twofold. By you were seeking too narrow of an audience, and then also talking down to your audience because you tried to have the most reach possible. There's other factors at play, like there's just no real iconic characters anymore, and that the design is ass, and that, you know, a lot of the movie making stuff has just been outsourced by computer clicks and buzzes and whizzes, but that's another discussion for another day. But when it comes to modern day creatives, right, like I brought up a couple of them just off the top of my head from the 80s and 90s, John Hughes, Robert Zemeckis, John Carpenter. You don't have that roster like you did back in the cut today. You have what? Christopher Nolan? That's legitimately the only name that you could put for a director or a creative on a movie poster, and it will actually put asses in seats. As much as I love Scorsese films, okay, and I love a whole host of them, you do that right now and people might maybe in nostalgic ways, but that's not bringing anybody under the age of, and I know that I'm kind of old at soul, but anybody under the age of 50 to the theaters? Like, who actually went out and seen Killers of the Flower Moon? All right, nobody. It bombed to the theaters. I hear that it's good. It's just also like 9 hours long. I guess it's closer to 4. There's a multitude of problems within Hollywood. I know I'm not breaking any new ground on that assessment. It's just when you hear stuff from legitimate creatives, legitimate legends in the business, and they are axing projects, good projects, viable projects for the sake of their own political agenda, yeah, you know that there's a multitude of issues that are out there, and thank God. Thank God, at least, because if I'm going to be completely honest, I don't think that this would live up to the original Who Framed Roger Rabbit 2, because there are certain guys that, the thing about creatives, they're just like athletes. They do eventually lose a step when they come back to a project. I think the world is probably better for just simply having the one Roger Rabbit film as opposed to an entire burgeoning franchise 35 years after release. But also, if Hollywood would just simply get out of their own way and listen to the public instead of proselytizing the public, they would be in much better shape. But then again, that's also like asking Bogey to stop drinking Mountain Dew. So with all that said, thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.